Hey YouTube, welcome back to the channel. In this video, I'm going to be continuing with the Saturn through the houses series. And in this video, I am going to be talking about what it means to have your Saturn in your partner's third house and what that may look like. So when it comes to the third house, this is really the house of siblings, the house of short distance travels, the house of communication, and the house of those daily routine or tasks that one person has to take on. And having somebody Saturn coming into this house can also affect those things. And this can be seen especially through the communication, which can either take a very serious form or it can just require a lot of work or a huge focus around this. But it can also be that this relationship is also affected or influenced by relatives or by siblings in some way. There could be this added duty or responsibility towards somebody is siblings or somebody that's close to one or both of the partners, and it can influence their relationship as well. And another way in which these different elements can affect the relationship is that there can be some kind of distance between the Saturn person and the third house person, and that can take the form of traveling. There could be a short distance between them that kind of forces them to have to kind of work on developing a routine around something more structured or something more responsible when it comes to how they take on travel and even just exploration in this way. And another thing that can also be affecting this relationship is their commitment to personal growth in this relationship. With the third house, this is also very much the house of learning. So with somebody Saturn coming into your third house, there is also this sense of support from the Saturn person to the third house person when it comes to their pursuits, when it comes to their intellectual pursuits, and they're wanting to develop or get educated as far as their skills or any kind of learning pursuits. And both the Saturn person and the third house person can really support each other when it comes to their growth in an area of learning through this relationship. And the Saturn person especially really wants to be able to assist the third house person when it comes to their growth, their development, especially as far as mentoring them or contributing to their personal development. They can have a strong commitment and even just tasks that they have to do every day that are kind of a part of their routines or are a responsibility. Another way this synastry can really affect the relationship in the two partners is in their communication. Perhaps one of the biggest ways in which the synastry can affect them and their relationship is seen in their communication. Because Saturn here kind of has a way of almost shutting down any kind of conversation that is not so deliberate and is pretty light-hearted and wants to be able to have a more seriousness to their communication style, there can be this need to balance out the seriousness and the light-heartedness in their conversations, especially in this relationship, to achieve harmony between the two partners. And one way in which they could improve their communication is by taking on mutual hobbies that can be more related to communication, like writing or learning together, or any activities that will require a more structured form of communication with each other. When it comes to the communication between the Saturn person and the third house person, it can be a bit tricky because of the way in which the Saturn person sees the third house person's way of communicating and the way that the third house person thinks. The Saturn person may kind of interpret it as being a bit immature, or they can feel like the third house person thinks and speaks in a way that is very confusing to them, or they could feel like it is impulsive, and they could have this desire to be able to take on a mentor or a guide kind of role towards the situation and help the third house person when it comes to the way in which they communicate. And they may want to just be the person to show the third house person how to have a more grown-up way of having a more grown-up conversation or way of talking, communicating. And for the third house person could feel kind of stifled by the Saturn person in expressing themselves freely. And the Saturn person may try to do this by trying to slow down the third house person or trying to encourage them to level up the way in which they communicate. Whereas on the other side, this third house person can feel a bit stifled in the way in which they express themselves and can perceive that as the Saturn person being critical or being negative or being disapproving of them when they try to communicate with the Saturn person. And what that can lead to is the third house person kind of censoring themselves when they speak to the Saturn person, because they can perceive that the Saturn person is going to either be super critical, or the Saturn person is going to disapprove, or the Saturn person is going to just flat out ignore them. And so communication with this placement can be very deliberate. It can also be very concise and short to the point. And for the third house person that may feel like walking on eggshells, they can also feel like the Saturn person is going to interrupt them when they speak, or they're going to cut them off. And they can just be a bit of they can be communication blocks with this. And even just awkward silences between them. And one area of their relationship where they work together can be really when it comes to the communication, and both partners can feel very responsible towards their communication to make this relationship work. In the positive, how this can affect the relationship is that they can really develop a very mature way of communicating with each other that is very thoughtful, and it can have a lot of depth behind it. And that can really influence their connection over time, and they can have really effective exchanges when it comes to their communication. However, when it comes to the more challenging or negatives of this relationship, it is in those communication barriers or those communication blocks that can take place. And the third house person can even feel a bit frustrated communicating with the Saturn person, like they are being restricted from being able to express themselves freely. And that can also be a challenge, especially for the third house person in this relationship, because they can feel like the Saturn person is being pessimistic or has a potential to be pessimistic towards them, which can also be another kind of challenge with the synastry with somebody's Saturn coming into your third house. Both the Saturn person and the third house person can kind of be unwilling to share their ideas freely with each other. And it's possible that the third house person becomes a little bit more reserved when around or in the presence of the Saturn person, because of that fear of being silenced or being interrupted, or feeling like there is this really cynical or being overly criticized by the Saturn person. And for the Saturn person, them kind of shutting down or slowing down the third house person in their speech or their communication can be coming from a place of them wanting to be able to have a more measured or thoughtful approach in the way in which the third house person communicates with the Saturn person. But the Saturn person may have a very serious demeanor in the way in which they approach being able to convey that to the third house person, and they may need to put in a more conscious effort towards the emotional support that they are providing in this relationship with the third house person. But despite all of the challenges or negatives, the Saturn person really sees a lot of potential in the third house person and in their relationship with the third house person. They may want to be the one to assist the third house person when it comes to reaching their fullest potential, and they're willing to invest and put effort towards being able to build on that. And the Saturn person can invest a lot of time and put a lot of effort into being able to build a very stable and enduring connection with the third house person. Even though for the third house person, it can feel like the Saturn person just never lets them talk, or never lets them get a word in, or never really lets them be free in their expression. The Saturn person is kind of coming from a place of wanting to assist, but also of coming from a place of feeling frustrated themselves with communication, because they have a more serious demeanor when it comes to how they're approaching things, and they want the third house to also have this approach so that they can better understand them. Well, that does it for this video on having your Saturn in your partner's third house in synastry. Thank you so much for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it and you found it helpful. If you did, please be sure to give this video a thumbs up and to subscribe to this channel for more videos. Well, that is where I love and leave you. Thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you in the next video. Bye guys.